I was in my early 30s, living a quiet life in the suburbs. My husband, always traveling for work, was more like a ghost in our marriage than a partner. Most evenings were spent alone with a glass of wine and silence pressing in from every corner of the house. It was during one of those long, uneventful weeks that I got a call from Liam, my sister's son. He had just finished school and was coming to the city for a few job interviews. He needed a place to stay for a few days, and naturally, I offered him our guest room. I hadn't seen Liam since he was a teenager. Back then, he was awkward and shy. But when he arrived at my doorstep, I barely recognized him. He was taller, his voice deeper, and there was a quiet confidence in his posture. I gave him a warm welcome, surprised by how mature he seemed. We caught up quickly. He talked about school, future plans, and how hard it had been to lose his dad at a young age. There was something genuine about his tone that made me listen more closely than I usually did. That first night, we had dinner together. He offered to cook and made pasta from scratch. I was impressed. It had been so long since anyone cooked for me. As we ate, the conversation flowed effortlessly. We laughed about old family memories, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of warmth in the house again. I brushed it off as nostalgia. Over the next couple of days, Liam settled in comfortably. He was polite, thoughtful, and helped around the house without being asked. He fixed a leaky tap, changed a light bulb, and even brought me coffee in the morning. Small gestures, but they stood out. I began to look forward to those little interactions. I told myself it was just nice having company around, especially someone who wasn't rushing out the door all the time like my husband. Late one night, we stayed up talking in the living room. I opened up about how disconnected I felt in my marriage. He listened, not like a child, but like a man who understood. He didn't offer solutions, just attention, and somehow, that was more comforting than advice. I started noticing the way he looked at me, gentle, respectful, but lingering. I reminded myself he was family, but my heart didn't seem to care. Each smile felt a bit warmer. Each glance held something unspoken. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it wasn't innocent anymore either. I went to bed that night, lying awake longer than usual. His words echoed in my head, and I caught myself smiling in the dark. There was no logical reason to feel that way, but the feeling was there. And feelings, once stirred, have a way of taking root when no one's watching. The days passed, and our interactions grew more frequent, more natural, and more comfortable than I had anticipated. Liam started picking up on my moods with unsettling precision. If I was quiet, he'd gently ask if I was okay. If I seemed stressed, he'd lighten the mood with a joke or start tidying up without a word. His presence was easy, but the ease itself began to unsettle me. I started dressing a bit nicer in the mornings, catching myself checking my reflection before walking into the kitchen. I told myself it was silly, but I didn't stop. We started having longer conversations, some about life, others about regrets and choices. One afternoon, we found ourselves talking about love, and he said something that stayed with me. Most people aren't unhappy because of the person they're with, but because they feel invisible. I didn't respond, but his words struck a nerve I had tried hard to numb. That night, while I was reading on the couch, he came and sat close, showing me something on his phone. Our shoulders touched. I didn't move. He noticed. The next morning, he made breakfast and placed a note under my coffee cup. Thanks for being easy to talk to. It was innocent, technically, but the implication ran deeper. A strange tension started building in the air between us. We weren't doing anything wrong, but something about the way we smiled at each other said otherwise. One evening, the power went out during a thunderstorm. We lit a few candles and played a board game. Somewhere between the laughter and teasing, our hands touched and lingered. Neither of us pulled away quickly. There was a quiet pause. I could feel his eyes on me. My heart beat faster than it should have. I told myself to stop reading into things, but I couldn't deny the feeling that was growing stronger each day. He was polite, never overstepping. But there were moments when our conversations felt like something more. When I talked about my marriage, he listened like he already knew the gaps I was trying to fill. I started dreaming about what it would be like to be seen that way all the time, not as someone's wife, but as someone who mattered. One night, I woke up from a restless sleep and went to the kitchen. He was there too, unable to sleep. We talked softly, and before I realized it, we were standing too close. His hand reached for mine instinctively, then stopped. I could feel the hesitation, the pull between right and wrong. I stepped back and forced a smile. He apologized immediately. I said it was fine, but it wasn't. I couldn't ignore it anymore. There was something unspoken between us that had started without permission. I tried to convince myself it was just admiration, a harmless connection born out of loneliness. But deep down, I knew it was becoming something that could no longer be brushed aside. Liam had just received a job offer from a company he admired. I was genuinely happy for him. We decided to have a quiet dinner to celebrate. The mood was light, yet under the surface, something more complicated simmered. We talked about his future, his plans, and I found myself growing uneasy at the thought of him leaving. I didn't say it aloud, but the idea of the house going back to silence unsettled me. He noticed my quietness and asked if I was okay. I told him I was just tired, but he didn't look convinced. Later that evening, we ended up outside talking under the open sky. There was a stillness that made everything feel too personal. He looked at me and said, "You're different from anyone I've ever met. You listen and you see people for who they are." I tried to brush off the compliment, but his gaze didn't waver. Then he added, "You made me feel like I belong." That sentence sat between us, full of meaning we both understood, but wished we didn't. I told him he was special, that I was proud of the man he was becoming. But my voice cracked near the end. He took a step closer, and for a moment I didn't move. My breath hitched when he leaned in, not fully, just enough to make the intention clear. Our faces were inches apart. He waited, as if silently asking for permission. My heart thundered in my chest. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know if I was going to stop it. Then, the moment broke. My phone buzzed. It was my husband calling from his hotel. He said he was flying home 2 days early. I nodded through the call, barely listening. When I hung up, I looked at Liam and took a step back. Everything hit me all at once. What was I doing? How had I let it get this far? The emotional closeness, the touches, the glances, they weren't harmless anymore. I told him firmly that we'd crossed a line. He didn't argue, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. He said softly, "I never wanted to hurt you. But he stopped himself. I asked him to give me space. He nodded and walked away without saying another word. I stood alone, overwhelmed by shame, confusion, and guilt. Nothing had technically happened, but in my heart, I knew it had gone too far. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, asking myself how I allowed it. I had betrayed not just my marriage, but my own principles. I had justified small things until they built a reality I didn't recognize. The worst part wasn't that something almost happened, it was knowing that a part of me had wanted it to. The next morning, the energy in the house had shifted. We barely spoke during breakfast. Liam kept his eyes on his plate, and I avoided his completely. He told me he'd scheduled his return trip for later that day. I nodded, pretending I was fine with it, even though my chest tightened at the thought. The silence between us was heavy, not angry, just filled with words neither of us dared to speak. As the hours passed, I tried to distract myself with chores, but my thoughts stayed tangled. I kept replaying the past few days, each glance and word now weighing more than they had in the moment. This wasn't just about me anymore. I had allowed something that blurred the boundaries of family and morality. I had invited loneliness to guide me down a path I never thought I'd even glance at. When it was time for him to leave, I walked him to the door. He turned to me and said, "I didn't come here expecting any of this." His voice was quiet but sincere. "You were the first person in a long time who made me feel like I mattered. I'm sorry if I made things harder for you." I didn't know what to say. The truth was, I wasn't angry at him. I was angry at myself for needing the kind of attention that he gave so freely. I told him to focus on his new job and his future, and that this, whatever it was, needed to stay behind us. He nodded, understanding more in my silence than in my words. As he left, a strange emptiness filled the house again, But this time it wasn't peaceful. It was sharp and echoing. That evening, my husband returned. He hugged me like nothing had changed, completely unaware of the storm I had weathered in his absence. I looked at him, wondering when exactly I had stopped feeling seen by him. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Some truths aren't meant to be spoken out loud, not because they're unforgivable, but because they can never be fixed once exposed. Over the next few weeks, life returned to routine, but nothing felt the same. I moved through my days carefully, questioning every emotion. I had learned something about myself I hadn't wanted to face. I was vulnerable, and vulnerability left unchecked can be dangerous. The line between emotional connection and betrayal is thinner than we want to admit. I didn't reach out to Liam. He didn't contact me either. We both knew silence was the only way to preserve whatever dignity we had left. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals are the ones no one sees. They happen quietly, in moments between what is done and what is only imagined. I'm still married. From the outside, nothing has changed. But on the inside, I live with the memory of something that almost was. A version of me I never thought existed. A choice I almost made. And the understanding that love, in the wrong place and at the wrong time, isn't love at all. It's just a shadow waiting to disappear.